Hi, I'm Ahava. Today I'm joined by my very smart friend, Cynthia Newton, to talk about the intersection of marketing and recruitment. You've got questions, we've got answers. Cynthia, thank you so much for being here. It's so great to have you.
Thanks for having me. Super excited to talk to you about this topic. We started working on what is the employer brand? What are people saying about us as employers? Because when you're working in direct care, think about what your competition is. It's not necessarily other healthcare providers, and this goes for health systems as well. It's also other companies in your marketplace. So if you're looking at those support staff, whether it's in the kitchen or it's housekeeping or any of those, your competitors are not just the other healthcare providers, it's other types of businesses. Because frankly, for some of those entry level
Yeah,
positions, so that's
competition.
what they were
Yeah.
most interested in, is how they were showing up in online when people were looking for positions and comparing them to Costco or a Walmart. And so that was my first inkling, and when they went public, one of the biggest pieces was that they had a strong employer brand in that public launch. So just not a strong consumer brand, but a strong employer brand. And so I fell into that kind of by accident, right? And then I started growing and learning more and more about it and how important it was and how overlooked it was in healthcare.
I think you're hitting on something very important about how overlooked, an employer brand reputation is as opposed to just brand reputation. So
Exactly.
let's talk about, and I think that this is something that is very concerning to everybody right now with reputation and brand, because AI is serving up these older reviews that sort of don't really speak to where the brand is right now at this moment. But for whatever search algorithm reason, they're pulling up, content that's not positive about a brand. And it's older and it might not really reflect what's happening right now. So how can marketing teams collaborate more strategically with HR to elevate employee storytelling, especially on platforms like Instagram and LinkedIn, where both consumers and potential hires are watching, because of this real concern now about how AI is serving up these poor reviews?
That's a really good question, and I want to think back to about 10, maybe even 12, 15 years ago. We started talking about reputation for patient experience. And we had to, as marketers, we had to start building that relationship with the PX team, right? And getting their buy-in and getting their trust because they were all about their CAP scores, right? And those are the internal barometers that they'd be like, well, our CAP scores tell we're great, we have. But what's out there for the public to see when they do search, perception's reality. So if your perception is that they're a 2.3 on Google, that's the reality, and you might look past them, right? So we had to make those inroads and get PX to understand the value of requesting reviews from our patients, and
Sure.
how that was going to impact or not impact the CAPS completion rate. We had to go to legal and to compliance to talk about how we were going to respond to these reviews online to make sure HIPAA violations weren't going to happen, right?
Right.
And so we had to build this new relationship. So I'm going to challenge our industry that we need to start building that same relationship with the HR team, right? And that's what we did internally with one of my large clients, where they were very much about the HR team when we went over to them. And we had a very strong consumer brand. We had been doing review requesting, reputation management for a few years with them. And we went to the HR team to say, hey, this is our score on Glassdoor and Indeed. This doesn't fairly represent our employer brand. It took us a year to get their buy-in of showing how does this happen? We started with responding first, so we went through that. What is our brand voice internally? How do we want to show up in these responses? And one of the things I will say is we have a little bit more wiggle room. Compliance wasn't as worried about that, right? It's not a HIPAA violation if you're responding to employee reviews, unless they bring up patient names,
Patients,
which
yeah.
I've never seen happen. So
Yeah.
but it's more about showing up, and I'm going to say, because they're anonymous, right, on Glassdoor and Indeed, personalizing your responses. And you're like, well, how do you do that when it's anonymous? Really reading the reviews, because in the reviews, even with a 5-star review, there's pros, and then there's cons, and then there's advice. So these are really robust reviews. And in your response, you should be acknowledging both the positive and the negative, and then having some type of next step call to action resolution, right? Even if it's just to thank them and say, if you have any further feedback that you'd like to give them some place to go. And because you got to show up and be real.
Okay, so I want to role play with you for a second because I want to challenge you. So I want to be
Okay.
an HR professional and I want to say to you, you know what, Cynthia, this is lovely. And thank you for pointing this out to us. This is great. We're so happy you showed this to us. Quite frankly, right now, we don't have enough healthcare providers to provide services, and we have major access problems, which means we can't bill, which means that the institution is under massive financial pressure. I cannot spend my time answering reviews on Glassdoor. I need to spend my time finding good healthcare providers so that we can start billing, because that's the financial needs of the institution. How do you respond to that?
I understand exactly where you're coming from, and I'm seeing this across the country. These are real challenges that we're facing. When we look at our industry rate of turnover, it's pretty high compared to the rest of industries, right? I think we're averaging sometimes 25% year to year turnover. So for some, our main focus is going to be on that internal brand, that employer brand, and understanding why we're doing turnover, what is the sentiment of our employees. So are we doing that employee engagement survey? And the first question I would ask is, are you doing regular employee engagement surveys? Is this, I hate to say it, every other year, like a lot of organizations from what I hear? Is it pulse surveys? So you have a good pulse on what's being said and you're doing it several times throughout the year or throughout their employee journey. And having a good idea of what's being said internally, but looking externally and seeing the monitoring side. What is being said on these third party? What's being said in social media? So some social listening there too. What's being said in Reddit? What's being said in Fishbowl? And be able to collate this information all in one place to do some trending, right?
Yeah.
To get a firm work. If there is work that needs to be done internally, 100%. There's a great story that's out there in Nebraska Medicine, Frank Lococo and Katie Beach talking about the hard work that they needed to do as an organization to really reset their EVP, and reset that internal employer brand. And then they've alluded to this 2.0 version, right? And for me, that 2.0 version is going to include how they're showing up in searches and showing up in where candidates are going to be seeing that information. And how do you communicate your internal brand to the external brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. What I'm hearing you say is you can't afford to let your culture slip through your fingertips because it's going to affect your ability to hire and retain talent.
Absolutely.
And culture, unfortunately, today is not necessarily decided by what's happening within the walls of the building. It's happening online. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that that's a really good response that I think an HR person, with experience could really hear. I'm curious. So what we see in digital strategy is that a lot of our healthcare clients are using their public Instagram. I mean, not that there's a private Instagram, but their Instagram as employee retention and sort of, employee awards, brand stuff. And I always say to clients, whenever we do discoveries or we talk them through this, I always say to them, you might want to think about having 2 Instagram channels. You might want to think about having one for your employees that functions as sort of like a public intranet. And then you might want to think about having a channel that's really about, health education or, advances that you're making in particular areas, that kind of thing. And obviously that's a lot to manage and you need a robust content or social media team to do that. But I'm wondering what you think about using Instagram and Facebook as ways to publicize employees and what they're doing. Do you think that that's an effective form of, helping culture?
I do. I think the more important thing is really talking about, do you have do you have a plan? Right? Instead of just going out there and hodgepodging,
No,
we're going to throw
you
up
do not.
some awards, the latest Bees, award winner. I mean, those are important, and people love to see themselves on an Instagram post, on a Facebook post, getting there.
100%.
That's great. It really is. But I would challenge folks to say, really, what's your overall strategic plan for recruitment and retention? And really, like you're saying, I'm totally for having a separate Instagram page for for employee, a separate Facebook for careers, right? I've even set up Google business profiles for careers, right? To have that separation, or claiming and managing your Glassdoor and Indeed. Possibly doing sponsored, where you really have an opportunity to deliver great information where candidates are looking, right? So it's really not just about the tactics, because some of the things that I do are tactics, but it's about the strategy and the goals, right?
Maybe you should build like a dating app, like a job. Swipe right if you want this job.
I love that. But really, that's what Glassdoor and Indeed kind of are, right? Like,
they seem more like a cesspool of places for people to complain about things.
well, okay. So that's a good point that you're bringing up. So one of the things that I learned after 12, 15 years of doing the consumer reputation management in healthcare is that left to organic feedback, it does present itself like a cesspool. Why is that? It's human nature to be more motivated to talk negatively about an experience.
Right. Happy employees are not going to go to Glassdoor. That's
happy
100%
employees,
true.
Right? It's just like happy patients. You know, until we started review requesting, however you're doing it, whether you're doing it with every visit through an SMS message, like some of my clients, whether you're doing it at the tail end of your caps, asking people to go, you know, however you're doing it, the moment we turn on that requesting feature, we see the volume go up of reviews, and we don't see the growth in negative reviews. It stays very consistent.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Where we see the predominant amount of review growth is in positive. So the same thing applies. Again, it's taking that playbook, if you will, for consumer reputation management and flipping the switch, flipping the script over to employee, right? So asking employees at key moments. So one of my clients, what we did was we launched it because you don't want to just do one request across the whole organization. You have 20,000 employees and you don't want it barraged onto the Glassdoor and Indeed all at once, because just like search for consumer, recency, right? Consistency, relevancy, the content in those reviews is what's going to help you in search results. Those are key things that we need to be looking at. And we're not, you know, very few organizations are really cultivating their online reputation for their employer brand. And that leads to that index that we created. So I created an index called the 2025 Healthcare Employer Brand Index. And I'm not out here to call out any, you know, bad things about folks. But what I did was
let's do that. Let's do that online.
Let's do it.
I'm here for the tea.
You'd be surprised. So one of the things about the index is we built it first on award winners, right? Who's winning the best employer award, the top employer award? There's multitudes out there of them, and they have their place, they have their importance, right? So that's why we started building this index, was taking those folks that have been named on. I just did an update with the 2025 Becker's top 125 top employers. That's just alphabetical. There's no, you know, rhyme or reason to their rating scale. It's just alphabetical. And then I put it out there, their Glassdoor, their volume on Glassdoor, their overall rating on Indeed, the volume, whether they're replying to reviews is on there. Do they have a claimed profile? I can tell if someone's claimed the profile, that free profile, or if they have a sponsored profile. And then I also included, do they have consumer transparency on their website?
Right.
And it's for a reason. It's to see where this organization.
You're talking about the price, no price surprises, or what you say transparency?
Yeah, the transparency of patient feedback. So publishing their top scores on their physician profiles, maybe on their service line pages in that sense, because that gives people a frame of mind of where is this organization in the overall reputation side of things? Have they been actively managing their consumer reputation? Because if they are, you know, they're hopefully going to start managing their brand reputation for their employer side.
Okay, so we'll have a link to the index in the comments. What are the risks of not investing in employer brand, and how have you seen this play out in recruiting or retaining healthcare talent? Who should own the employer brand?
All right, so let's break that down.
Okay.
To answer the first part, I think an important consideration is that if the experience of the employees does not match the messaging in recruitment or internal comms, it can erode trust and have implications for not only the employer brand, but your turnover rate, right? And really understanding what's causing this turnover. But it also can impact the consumer brand. So if you think about it, how could an organization have a great patient experience if the employees that are driving that experience are unhappy? So we really need to understand where our
who owns that? But who owns that though?
That's the question of the century. I think that employer
heard it here first. That's the question of the century.
I think it can fall into kind of a no man's land, right? So I
But
think
then that's the problem, because then it's never going to get taken care of.
exactly. So HR is the assumption, right, of the owners. Think about Glassdoor and Indeed, right? If if they are running job postings and they want to make sure that that's a channel for people to, so they typically are the ones that either claim and start utilizing Glassdoor and Indeed. It's because that is a feeder for candidate for job postings. And so, the internal pages for careers, I've seen some really good ones and I've seen some really bad ones. And again, is marketing involved? Because now you think about the silos that we have, right? You have digital, you have the IT, you have the people that build the website, and then they go to HR because they're the owner of those career pages, but who's feeding the content? Is it just a job listing, a job posting site? Is there content that feeds that brand story that's being fed by marketing? And I'm going to challenge and say, in most cases, it's not. So that's, I think, the first hurdle that we need to overcome is figuring out and saying who owns employer brand. I'm going to say that everybody does.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody's a brand ambassador.
I think when you say it's everybody, it becomes nobody. What I think it is it really has to be HR. And I think that you need to educate somebody in HR about all of this, which they probably know about, but just feel like they don't have the resources. And then you pilot it, right? You start with something small and you show that it does, in fact, change things in some measurable way. And then you get more money to do more of it. But I mean, it's always an argument, I think, when you start talking about brand and who owns it. Everybody wants to say everybody, but once everybody owns it, then who's really responsible for making sure? Cynthia, this has been an incredible conversation. Where can people find you?
On LinkedIn, but also I have a website, Cynthia Newton Consulting, it's long.com, where there's a link to that index.
Yes.
We recently did a webinar on owning your profiles on Glassdoor and Indeed and how that can impact your organization. But yeah, this is it's a newer topic, and so excited to see it getting.
It's really important. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our audience for being here. If you have a hot topic you want us to cover, please let me know at ahava.leaptag@ahamediagroup.com. We'll see you next time.